Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 281 is this Saturday, one of the most anticipated fight cards of the year. And in the main event, we have Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira for the middleweight title. And this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction for this fight. I've already done a bunch of UFC 281 prediction videos. I will link them all down in the description if you want to go check them out after this. But this is the fight that people really care about on this card. There's a lot of great fights, but obviously the main event is the most intriguing fight on this card. And it's intriguing for so many reasons. Obviously, it's very important. It's for the middleweight title, but it's such a great backstory as well. You have Alex Pereira, who has 2 wins over Israel Adesanya in kickboxing, one being via knockout, and now he's followed Israel Adesanya over to MMA to see if he can take the middleweight title off of him. And Israel Adesanya is undefeated in the UFC at middleweight. And on top of that, you have Pereira coming off a savage knockout over Sean Strickland. And you have Israel Adesanya, who I know he hasn't had the most exciting fights, but he's looked basically unbeatable. I know the Robert Whittaker second fight was very close, but, you know, even in the boring fights, Jared Cannonier really had nothing for him. You know, the Robert Whittaker fight was close, but Adesanya was never in any real trouble in that fight. The Marvin Vettori rematch, Adesanya dominated. We're going to talk about all these fights as well as the 2 kickboxing fights against Alex Pereira as well. But you have 2 elite kickboxers who have fought in kickboxing twice in the past. One guy has 2 wins, and now the guy who's lost both of those fights is the champion in the UFC. And we knew when Alex Pereira got signed to the UFC, we knew the UFC was going to fast track him to a title shot against Israel Adesanya, and now it's finally here. It seems like just yesterday, people were saying, what do you think about the Alex Pereira signing? And now 1 year later, he is fighting for the UFC middleweight title against Israel Adesanya. This is such an intriguing matchup. It's so important for both guys' careers. And also for Israel Adesanya, if he beats Alex Pereira, he has now cleaned out the division, essentially. Alex Pereira is kind of like the last guy. Adesanya's beaten everyone. And I know we have guys making their ways up the rank, like Nasruddin Imavov or Andre Muniz. But for all intents and purposes, you know, there's talk if Adesanya wins this fight and Yuri is able to retain the light heavyweight belt at UFC 282, there's talk Israel Adesanya may move up again and try to become a 2-weight champion. But Alex Pereira is the toughest test of Israel Adesanya's career, in my opinion. And on top of that, this is the first time in a long time that there has been a perceived threat to Israel Adesanya. The last time I felt like Israel Adesanya could lose a fight going into that fight was when he fought Paulo Costa. And we all know what happened there. This is the first time in a long time going into an Israel Adesanya fight I'm like, Adesanya could really lose this fight and he could get devastatingly KO'd. So I'm super intrigued in this matchup. I'm going to give you my prediction in a little bit. We're going to talk about a bunch of fights throughout these guys' career. If you look at the tail of the tape, Israel Adesanya is 23-1 in MMA. Alex Pereira is 6-1. Adesanya is the champion. Pereira is ranked number 4 in the official rankings. Adesanya is 33. Pereira is 35. They are both 6'4", and they both have an 80-inch reach. So basically, outside of a little bit of an age difference, everything is virtually identical in the words of Mike Goldberg. You look at Alex Pereira, he only has 3 fights in the UFC. He made his UFC debut at UFC 268 November of last year. It's crazy. To go from fighting on the prelims, making your UFC debut 1 year ago, to basically the same card a year later at Madison Square Garden, and now you're the headliner fighting for the belt. We all knew this was the UFC's plan going into this, but it's just absolutely insane. And the fight against Andreas Michailidis, he faced some adversity in this fight. He got out-grappled in the first round, but he came out in the second round. Every round starts on the feet, and he lands a crazy flying knee and brutally KOs Michailidis. You look at the fight after that, he fought Bruno Silva in March of this year. I thought he was going to go out there and decimate Bruno Silva, but he actually faced some adversity in this fight as well. Bruno Silva was able to clinch up with him. He was able to take him down. Bruno Silva was even out striking him at some points in this fight just because of the threat of the clinch and the threat of the takedown. This was no easy fight. And going to the scorecards, I wasn't even certain that Alex Pereira would get the win on the judges' scorecards. I thought Pereira did enough to win, but it was close enough where I was like, maybe the judges could have it the other way, 29-28 the other way or something along those lines. And then his most recent fight was against Sean Strickland at UFC 276. He fought on the same card as Israel Adesanya. And, this was his best performance against his highest ranked opponent. Sean Strickland, there was talk going into this fight that Sean Strickland was going to come out and grapple with Alex Pereira because obviously that makes the most sense. Sean Strickland came out flat-footed, walked towards Alex Pereira, tried to strike with him, and Alex Pereira just kept throwing that left hand to the body over and over and over again in the first round. Sean Strickland was still plotting forward. He started dropping his hands to protect the body, and then boom, Alex Pereira lands a nasty left hook, hurts him badly, and then finishes him off with punches. And I knew right then and there, when he KO'd Sean Strickland, I knew Alex Pereira would be next in line for an Israel Adesanya middleweight title fight, especially considering they put him on the same card. In the main event of UFC 276 was Israel Adesanya versus Jared Cannonier. But one thing I want to mention, it's crazy the lack of MMA experience that Alex Pereira has. Only 7 pro MMA fights, 6 wins, 5 by knockout, 1 by decision. Of his 1 loss, he has 1 loss by submission. So not a lot of experience in MMA, but he has 33 kickboxing matches, 21 KOs, 7 losses, and I think 2 of those were by KO. We're going to talk about the Israel Adesanya fights here in a little bit, the kickboxing matches, but let's talk about Adesanya for a second. Adesanya has 23 pro MMA wins, 15 by knockout, 8 by decision. He has 1 loss, and that's via decision, and that's against Jan Blachowicz, which we'll talk about in a second. He comes into this fight on a 3-fight win streak. His last fight was against Jared Cannonier at UFC 276. Not a super eventful fight. Izzy just kind of kicking the legs, pumping the jab, fighting at range. Was never in any real trouble in this fight, but never really got super aggressive and just won the fight at range. Was nothing, particularly impressive. And I think a lot of people are kind of crapping on him because going into this fight, he's saying, I'm going to go out there and show out. And then he goes out there and puts on another lackluster performance against Jared Cannonier, but a solid win over a solid opponent nonetheless. The fight before that was at UFC 271, February of this year, against Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker made his way back to the top after losing to Adesanya. He fought a couple fights, won those fights, gets a rematch with Israel Adesanya at UFC 271. This was a very close fight. I scored it for Israel Adesanya. There were some people saying that Robert Whittaker got robbed. I don't believe that's the case. I thought Adesanya won this fight, but it wasn't super eventful. This was a little bit more exciting than the Jared Cannonier fight. I think Robert Whittaker got rocked or dropped in the second round or the first round. I can't remember exactly. But Adesanya kind of won this fight with the same thing, just pumping the jab, kicking the legs, and just adding up volumes of strikes and winning the fight that way. And it wasn't particularly eventful. I think Robert Whittaker got his back at one point in this fight. But, there wasn't a whole lot of highlights of Adesanya versus Whittaker 2. The fight before that against Marvin Vettori, I don't think this was a terrible fight at UFC 263. This was a rematch against Marvin Vettori. He had already fought Marvin Vettori before he was the champion. Basically dominated Marvin Vettori in this fight. At one point, Marvin Vettori had the back of Adesanya as well, but only held it for literally like 5 seconds, and Adesanya was able to escape. And then his last loss was in March of 2021 against Jan Blachowicz. He had moved up in weight to try to become a double champion, and Jan Blachowicz out-kickboxed him and out-grappled him. Going into this fight, a lot of people picked Israel Adesanya in this fight. I picked Jan Blachowicz. I thought Jan Blachowicz was too big, too strong, and had a grappling advantage. And sure enough, Jan Blachowicz went out there. I can't remember what I scored the fight, but I thought it was a fairly clear win for Jan Blachowicz, regardless of the way the commentary was talking going into this fight. And Jan outstruck him in a couple of these rounds as well, where it was majority standing. But in the later rounds, he used the grappling, took him down, controlled him on the ground, used the size, and was just able to control him and win the decision. The fight before that, which was Israel Adesanya's last really impressive fight against Paulo Costa, I actually picked Paulo Costa in this fight, and I thought Paulo Costa was big, strong. I thought he would force Adesanya to make a mistake, clip him, and finish him. Adesanya went out there. I think this is probably his best performance outside of maybe the Robert Whittaker fight where he earned the title. But he went out there and outclassed Paulo Costa. and brutally finished him in that second round and made Paulo Costa look like he didn't even belong in there. The fight before that was against Joe Romero. I mean, it wasn't even really a fight. Either guy could have got this decision because it was uneventful. Not much to say about that fight. And then the fight before that was when he won the belt from Robert Whittaker at UFC 243. Super impressive performance. KOs Robert Whittaker in the second round. And Israel Adesanya has had an absolute tear at middleweight. I mean, he's beat the who's who. He beat Marvin Vettori twice. He beat Brad Tavares. He beat Derek Brunson. He beat Anderson Silva, admittedly on the downturn of his career. He beat Kelvin Gastelum for an interim middleweight title. That's one of the best fights I've ever seen at UFC 236. And then we went over all the rest of his fights. He's had an amazing career at middleweight in the UFC. He's never lost at middleweight in the UFC. And now he's fighting the guy who has 2 wins over him in kickboxing. So let's talk about those kickboxing matches against Alex Pereira. The last one was in 2017 where he got KO'd by Alex Pereira in the 3rd round. And this was a fight that Adesanya was winning. He was outstriking Pereira. He was dodging the big shots. But Alex Pereira has a nuclear power in that left hand, clips Adesanya in the 3rd round and puts him out cold. Alex Pereira's left hand, I mean, if he lands on your chin, he's going to put you to sleep. And now we have smaller gloves, so it makes him even more dangerous. But Adesanya was winning this fight. He was landing some good shots. He was actually being fairly aggressive in this fight. He was landing some good kicks as well. He just got clipped and he got put to sleep. That was in March of 2017. The other loss to Alex Pereira is back in April of 2016 in kickboxing as well. In this fight, he lost via decision. But he should have won this fight. Adesanya outstruck him for the majority of the fight. It was competitive, but Adesanya should have got the decision. I think he was robbed in this fight. It is what it is. It's so long ago at this point in time. It was still a competitive fight. Both guys were very good strikers. This was 6 years ago. But Adesanya should have won this fight. They should be 1-1 in kickboxing. Fair enough. Pereira got that brutal KO in the second fight. But Adesanya should have a win on his record against Alex Pereira in 2016. Now, when I look at those kickboxing fights, because I feel like a lot of people are really putting a lot of stock in those fights, and it does make the backstory in the lead up to this fight very interesting, the fact that he has 2 wins over him. But we have to take into account these were 6 and 5 years ago. The knockout loss was 5 years ago. The decision loss was 6 years ago, and he really shouldn't even lost the decision. So one thing I want to say about that is how much do those really mean? Because I believe that Israel Adesanya as well as Alex Pereira have rapidly improved since then. It's been a long time since those fights. I get it. They were still very good then, but I think Adesanya, as far as his MMA skill set, has rapidly improved. And Pereira, he was young then too as well. I mean, it was 6 years ago. He was 29 years old at this point in time. So I think both guys are much better fighters than they were in these initial fights. So I'm curious, I think Adesanya was the more skilled fighter back then, even though he technically lost both of them. Has Alex Pereira been able to close that skill gap? And that's what's going to be interesting about this fight, because when I look at this fight for Pereira, I think Pereira really has one avenue to victory in this fight, and I think that's via KO. And I think Pereira can definitely go out there and knock out Adesanya. When I initially looked at this fight and I did an early prediction for this fight, I said Alex Pereira via knockout, because he's just an elite level striker. And I think he can put Adesanya in situations that guys like Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker, Marvin Vettori just can't do because of their striking abilities. Alex Pereira is a much better striker. And you look at Israel Adesanya, it's MMA, and none of these guys that he's fought throughout his UFC career are even close to the skill level of striking that Alex Pereira presents. But at the same time, I think Israel Adesanya is the more well-rounded mixed martial artist. And I know there's some people going into this fight saying, will Adesanya mix in the grappling? Will he take down Alex Pereira? Will he shoot on him and look to control him on the ground? And while I do believe Adesanya has an advantage there, I'm not sure that he will use it. But it's going to be very interesting to see what game plan each one of these guys come in with. Because also, I believe Alex Pereira could try to take an approach like Israel Adesanya has done in the past. I think Pereira could try to sit back and kickbox at range, and there's a chance Pereira could maybe win one of those kind of boring decisions. You know, if it's close enough, you never know with these judges. They could easily give a decision to Alex Pereira if it's just like a back and forth kickboxing match at range. But for my official prediction, and I think this is going to be a little bit unexpected for most people, I am going to go with Israel Adesanya via 4th round TKO. I just think Adesanya has gotten so much better since he fought Alex Pereira those last few times. And I believe that Adesanya may mix in the clinch work. I don't think he's going to shoot on takedowns, but I think he may clinch up with Alex Pereira. And I think Pereira's stamina hasn't looked the greatest, you know, against Bruno Silva. And I know there was grappling involved in that fight too. But in the 3rd round, if Alex Pereira is striking the way he was striking in that 3rd round against Bruno Silva, if he's striking that way against Israel Adesanya, I think Israel Adesanya will make him pay for it and will clip him and will finish him. And I think what's going to happen is this fight's going to kind of start out slow. I think Pereira is going to be trying to kickbox at range and kind of be a little bit tentative, maybe press forward a little bit. I think Adesanya is going to be his typical self. I think he's going to be more motivated than ever to beat Alex Pereira and get revenge. But I believe that Israel Adesanya, as the fight goes on, I think he's going to pull out ahead. I don't think it's going to be super significant. I think it's going to be competitive. I think they're going to be trading leg kicks, body kicks, jabs. I think they're both going to land. But as the fight goes on, I think Adesanya is going to be getting ahead. I think Pereira is going to start to wear down. I think Pereira is going to try to start getting a little bit desperate, looking for that left hook, looking for that KO, head hunting on Israel Adesanya. I think he's going to get tired in those later rounds. And I think in the 4th round, he's going to be pressing forward, knowing he has to get a finish. And I think Israel Adesanya is going to clip him, drop him, and finish him on the ground. I think there is a chance that Adesanya just ekes out kind of a relatively typical Adesanya, kind of a boring decision. But I really think Pereira, if he knows he's down on the scorecards, I think he will press forward and he will start looking for the finish against Israel Adesanya. And people think, oh, Israel Adesanya has been in boring fights. He can't finish anyone. You can't forget what he did to Paulo Costa. You can't forget what he did to Kelvin Gastelum. I know he didn't finish him, but that 5th round, he almost finished him. You can't forget what he did to Robert Whittaker in the first fight. You can't forget what he did to Derek Brunson. And I understand none of those guys are on the striking level as Alex Pereira. But as Pereira gets tired, we saw it in the Bruno Silva fight. As he gets tired, he drops his hands. And if he's more desperate to get a finish, he's going to be plotting forward, looking for the KO. And if you're a fighter who is plotting forward, throwing power shots against Israel Adesanya, that's exactly what he wants. And he will find openings. And I believe on Alex Pereira, I think he's going to find an opening in that 4th round, clip him with a big punch, follow him to the ground, and finish him off. And don't be surprised. I don't think Adesanya is going to be shooting in on takedowns. But don't be surprised if Pereira gets a little bit aggressive, if Adesanya clinches up with him, presses him against the fence, because Adesanya does have underrated grappling. We've seen him grappling with Robert Whittaker and Marvin Vettori. I think he's very strong in the clinch. I think he'll, maybe push Alex Pereira up against the fence, use some knees to the body. And I think that adding up with the fact that Pereira is going to be constantly fighting from behind and constantly getting out jabbed and leg kicked throughout the fight is just going to cause him to take those risks in the later rounds when he's a little bit more tired. We know Adesanya can go a hard 5 rounds. Look what happened against Kelvin Gastelum. His last 2 fights were 5 rounds. They were super uneventful, so you can't really take too much as far as his stamina from those. But we've seen him go 5 rounds on many occasions. And I think he will be the fresher fighter in those later rounds. And I think he will TKO Alex Pereira in the 4th round. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. And thank you so much for watching.